Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of the People and Dancefloors podcast. I think this is episode 4 of season 2, which is really exciting. And today we have a cannabis special discussion, and we are joined by two really eminent campaigners and advocates of cannabis reform. So I'm here with Andrew Bonello of Releaf Malta. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. And Derrick Bergman, who is a Dutch journalist, photographer, and has been an activist in the kind of cannabis for quite a while. Welcome, Derrick.
Hi, Julia. Thanks for having me.
I could say more about both of you, but I always feel weird when I'm talking about people in front of them. So I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to let you each say more about yourselves. So, my first question is for each of you to tell me a little bit more about your background. So, how did you come to work in this particular field? And I'm going to start with Andrew first.
I grew up basically sprang into my teenage years, sort of towards the late 80s, early 90s. So it was still sort of in a period where prohibition was quite strong, and in Malta it was as well, you know. So I was seeing a lot of actually friends of mine as well, sort of getting picked up by law enforcement and going down a nasty road, you know, when it comes to mental health because of these reasons. So it just kept happening and happening, and it was actually being reported on the newspapers. You know, most comments were always, you know, in favor of the police, saying you're doing a great job. And sort of constantly happening. So obviously it just kind of felt natural to bark back in one way or another. So obviously at those times you had to be very careful, you know, with what you say. But then as the years passed, obviously, you know, another countries moving and new politicians coming into the field as well, you know, of a different generation. But of course, then it was easier to discuss and dialogue about cannabis reform in a more open way. So I obviously then took it a little bit step further, where I organized a couple of marches down in the capital. Made sure that we were always present when people were being taken to court. You know, seeing if they needed any help, if we could help them out, find lawyers. Then eventually we formed the NGO Releaf, which is an advocacy group just for cannabis reform. So we've met with prime ministers and leaders of the opposition, and we've done all the rounds. We've written articles in the newspaper. So we've been very, very busy for the past three years, I'd say. So obviously, with what's happened now in our country, we can say that we feel sort of quite stoked.
That you've been very successful as well. So that's great. And I think what really struck me about your biography, reading your biography, or just briefly, was that you were once a football player, right? So at the national level. So I thought that was interesting because, of course, football is like the sport of the people. So you would have been well liked or well known by people in Malta.
Yes, I mean, obviously, I played in the top division. I actually had one season where we won the league. I played in 4 teams, different teams locally. So I know quite a lot of people. Quite a lot of people remember me. It was back in the 90s, after all, pre sort of internet days. So there's not much on the net, thank God. But it was, yes, it was a great part of my life. So I was basically, until I was 25 years old, I was living the life of an athlete.
No viral videos then of you playing or anything like that.
No, but I do have them, but I will release them at the right moment.
Nice, nice. Can't wait. Can't wait. Thank you. And also like obviously I feel like being a football player and also being a father, somebody who's responsible for for young children, I always feel that that gives a kind of a face of normality and relatability to people that operate in the drug policy reform space. And I think actually that's something that Derrick shares with you because I think you have 3 children, right? Or children, or I don't know how old they are,
Absolutely.
but
All
yeah.
adults.
You're a father. I mean, father is, is a relatable thing. It's like sometimes drug users or people who use drugs are painted as these like outsiders or, weird people and so on. And yeah, yes. Anyway, Derek, tell me more about yourself.
Yeah, I started off studying journalism, and while I was still studying, I saw this little ad in a national newspaper. They asked for like a freelance writer and photographer who had, I think they said like affinity with smoking the weed, so like blowen in Dutch, affinity to blowen. So I immediately cut it out of the paper because I thought it was so funny. I'd never seen an ad like that before, and I basically figured, even if I don't ever get that job, it'd be a nice story, to tell and maybe even to write about who's behind this. It turned out that the people who were behind it, I still work for as a freelancer after all these years. It's High Life. It's like the oldest running magazine in Europe about cannabis. So I basically was there from the start and had all this, yeah, all these adventures and branched out also to other media. And then in 2008, actually, I was at this event called the Cannabis Tribunal in The Hague, where politicians met with activists, with doctors, with coffee shop owners. And this really struck me because I was like a specialist in the field. But then shortly after that meeting, I crossed over and really became an activist, which is like you have to really think what you're doing there if you are a journalist, because you're supposed to be objective, etc. So I did think about it for a while, but then I also thought my experience is like different from Andrew's in the part. I was born in 1971, and we in Holland have had our policy, our tolerance policy on cannabis since 1976. So I sometimes call myself like a child. I'm a child of the tolerance policy, and I grew up where you were still able to go into the coffee shop at 16 and buy 30 grams. And this all repression came really. And I saw it all happening. It all went downhill from being like super liberal and everybody thinking we were very close to legalization to year after year more grinding of repression until now in 2022 we are really worse off than a lot of countries in Europe and around the world. People get evicted for growing a few cannabis plants like routinely in the Netherlands. So this, to me, has turned into like a real fight, like a personal fight. I have not been evicted from my house, but surely the police have been in my house and in my garden stealing my small outdoor plants. So, and a lot of people that fought also with the organization that was formed after the tribunal, the VOC. Some have died, so that even gives me like extra reason to go on working for them. And so, yeah, this has been an interesting ride.
What a journey. I mean, from native of the most tolerant country in the world all the way to, having to kind of out yourself as an activist in order to retain some of the rights that you had maybe taken for granted when you were younger or like that were more readily accessible.
Absolutely.
Um, just for the listeners, the VOC is the Union for the Abolition of Cannabis Prohibition, right? So in English, obviously,
Yep.
because that's
Yeah,
yeah.
it's actually a pun on this really this Dutch organization in the 17th century, what we still refer to as our golden century, but really by now in the 21st century, it's recognized for what it was, like a big slavery, opium trading, quite horrible, hyper capitalistic organization. They were actually the
Mm,
first really capitalist organization in the sense that you could buy shares in these in these businesses that they were doing, like sending the ships around the world, getting the slaves, getting the opium. So it was a pun on that because back then our prime minister also made some comment on VOC, and in the beginning it really acted this name to attract attention because every Dutch person will know what VOC is, and then they get confused because they
mm,
think, but they are for cannabis. So that was a bit of a joke, and then it's a funny story, actually, I think, because in the beginning we had the logo that was really modeled on the old 17th century VOC logo. But we had to change it after activists came after us, that said, how dare you use even this,
It's too
this shape.
evil. It's too evil. It's
It's
like they
too
didn't they
evil.
didn't get the joke. They didn't
And
get the joke.
yeah, but still, I talked to these people back then, because this is already years ago, and then I said, yeah, you have to really take it with a pinch of salt, and we really do it to get some attention. And then he said, but yeah, would you do the same thing with like a swastika, and say, it's a joke and it attracts attention? And he had me there, because yeah, for sure, what the original VOC did was bad. But that way also you learn. So we changed the logo, so now you can't see it anymore. And most people outside, they don't have the connotation, of course.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it would have been lost on me, but it's great that to see that you're doing some learning in response to other activists' kind of criticism
Absolutely.
around the logo. Yeah. And yeah, when he said the golden age, I thought that was the 70s, not the 17th century. I was like, it's just,
No, then we were really an empire, a big
yeah,
empire,
yeah,
with colonies all around the world, and
yeah,
it's really
yeah.
strange for us, like a tiny country that we still are, of course, that we
Well,
have.
as is for the same for the UK, which is where I'm based. So I can sympathize with you on that. So I guess the reason why I was interested to speak to both of you is in part because you kind of represent the origin and the end, the not the end, but the most recent kind of developments in the European cannabis reform story. So the Netherlands being the first country to reform, and Malta being, I guess, the most recent kind of kid on the block. So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about what you think the Netherlands got wrong that Malta can get right in cannabis reform. And I'm going to start with Derek first and then go to Andrew.
One thing is really very, very obvious that you shouldn't follow. We sometimes refer to it as the big hole in our policy, and that is that cannabis can be, with tight regulations, sold in the coffee shops if you're 18 years or older. But any growing of weed or wholesale of weed or any cannabis product is totally forbidden, and is also really, the police are after it. They are after the growers. So this is a totally paradoxical situation where you can see that, and it's, I don't know if it exists even in another country. uh, this is a policy that really breeds criminal behavior, because on the one hand you do allow these coffee shops to sell all this weed, but then they have not a single legal way or regulated way to get all the weed. So this is one of the things we do as VOC, is get this story out all the time to new politicians and to journalists, where you have the proof that already in the early 90s at the highest level there have been warnings from the Ministry of Justice that were secret, where they were saying, explaining, if we do not regulate the supply of the coffee shops, organized crime will get involved. So this is 30 years ago. And now we are 30 years on. And yeah, for sure the organized crime has gotten a big part of the thing, because also as they tighten repression and make the punishment higher, then sort of normal people like myself who grow a few plants, they get too scared. They don't want all this shit. So in the end, you are left over with people who take risks on a professional basis, which can be hardened criminals. Not at all saying that all of them are, but this is the dynamic that the Dutch government has really been reinforcing over 30 years now. They get more severe on the growing, the prices go up. It's even more interesting for criminals. So we get bad weed in the coffee shop for super high prices. It's really, really no good. And then people, especially if they rent their apartment or their house, because then you are the most vulnerable here, you can be evicted for even one plant. They made it so strict you can be evicted for not having any plant or cannabis at all, but having like a grow light and a tent that you can legally buy from a big internet shop all the way. So this is the main advice to give to Malta. Don't forget production. And then
Don't
if I
split the market. Like it's
yeah
it's
yeah
it's it's a fallacy, isn't it? It's crazy to think that you can kind of like you can like separate demand away from supplier and like make
it's
like
very
pretend.
crazy.
It's just, it doesn't make any
One way
sense.
to describe it very shortly and that people really understand it, I use it all the time with politicians and journalists. You are allowed to drink milk and to sell milk, but any cow gets shot immediately if the police see it, you know? So it's not a system. But to explain maybe a bit why this crazy system has developed like this, people need to understand in 1976, hardly anybody was smoking Dutch weed because it was like spinach to smoke. It was super bad weed. So like 80 to 90% was smoking hash that was imported, you know, from far, from Nepal, India, from Morocco. And then some foreign grass from Thailand, maybe Nigeria, Colombia, but tiny amount. The whole idea of Dutch wheat and growing wheat indoors only really started in the 80s and blossomed in the 90s. So this is to understand a bit these politicians. If they had any idea where it was coming from, they sort of knew, it's smuggled, you know, it comes from far away. But of course, the policymakers, they should have adapted to this reality. And like I said, they were warned about it, that if they didn't do it, they would cause a huge problem. And well, the rest is history. They didn't listen.
But I think in Malta's case, we're lucky to have a de jure system now, as opposed to the de facto one, which is more present in the Netherlands. Obviously, that, you know, it leaves a lot of loopholes and for criminality, which is obvious, you know. And I mean, I don't understand. I mean, and I feel sorry for my friends in the Netherlands, where one would have expected them to be at the forefront, definitely, of the whole reform, since they started such a long time ago. But that didn't happen. But locally, what I can say is that obviously we as an NGO are always, we have our eyes on everything that's happening outside of our shores. Obviously in Holland as well, in Europe, but also in the States. If we look at the States, you know, with the amount of states that have actually legalized recreational use there, they almost have, not all systems there are the same. So you have a lot to play with if you're trying to cook up some sort of new reform. You can see what was good and what was bad. If you look at sort of California, which might have legalized quite a while back compared to Illinois, where Chicago is, which was one of the newer ones, you would see the difference. You know, we can see what happened in California, you know, where producers are having a problem, you know, very high taxes, and it's kind of all over the place. But then if you move to the states that have legalized more recently, you can see how they've looked at these issues and they fixed them, especially by involving and making use of a social equity plan, which wasn't never available to other states before, because they realized that what you're doing here is you're not, this reform always has to be, wherever it is something, you are fixing something that is broken. You are not just creating sort of a new law out of nothing. There was something there which was very, very broken, and it was doing a lot of harm. And we can't just forget about that and just move forward from now onwards. And we're seeing this happen, like I mentioned, in some of the states in the US. And I think that's a fantastic thing, something we're pushing for here as well. And, you know, sort of the difference between social equity and equality. We want to make sure that the politicians know these things, especially now that we have a new cannabis authority in Malta. We can deal directly with them and send studies to them and try and see how we can work together. We are in dialogue, which is very good. So I think what Malta's doing is creating a pretty solid foundation. We've kept the big business out of the equation. It's going to be based on a not-for-profit system, which is marvelous. And we're going to be having associations. We can grow 4 plants now at home without the fear of being criminalized, and we can walk in public with 7 grams. You know, when we consider how we were before, it's actually pretty good. But it's there's a lot of work to be done, because this is a partial decriminalization. Lots of, especially the press, have been saying legalization, legalization, where, you know, you're still going to get arrested if you got more than 7 grams. If you've got more than 4 plants, you're going to be considered, you know, an international trafficker, and all sorts of things can happen. So the power is still there for law enforcement to really do the damage it's been doing for all these decades. So we need to keep pushing. We need to keep educating. This, for obviously for Malta, is something new. A lot of people were opposed to any sort of reform. I saw a lot of people change their minds when we've been having discussions over the past months. I can say when the white paper was released by the government, explaining what it had intended to do, people were allowed to put in their submissions. And then the government came out with the bill. This was last year. Sorry if I'm rushing from one thing to the other. And once the bill was passed, it was voted upon in Parliament. Obviously, in between that, there was a strong opposition that was launched basically by the I would call the Conservatives, probably more of the conservative centre-right Catholic Church, altogether have a lot of power in this country. Power as in they have a lot of media outlets, have their own newspapers, radio channels, and they were launching the message that cannabis was going to get out of hand if it was decriminalized, and all hell was going to break loose, and we don't have enough mental health facilities to take all these people in once everyone, you know. So anyway, it was along these lines where we might be giggling, but I'm telling you, these were a headline.
I tell you, here in my country, it's also the Christian parties, really the last 20 years especially, that make the most outrageous claims and still want every coffee shop to be closed down, and it's just terrible. And what there was one Christian politician who was like the drug policy specialist of the Christian party years back, and I was already as a journalist working on the issue, so I was on the train and I saw him sitting on the train. I thought this is a great chance for me to ask him, why is your drug policy basically so fucked up as a Christian party? And then, yeah, he was really nice to me, and he gave the answer. I'll never forget it. He said, basically, because drugs are a competitor to God.
Wow.
Yeah,
Very
I think
interesting.
it was a real true answer. That's truly how they see it, and they're not wrong about it, you know, because you don't need God if you can do it yourself, basically. If you see that we all have a part of this God in ourselves. That's the meaning of the word entheogen for drugs, like psychedelic drugs, including cannabis. So to me, that's always been yeah, a very interesting thing to keep in mind, is why are they fighting, these Christians? This is the reason they are fighting, and I have the impression that some other politicians are fighting, because really, cannabis for a lot of people means more independent thinking, you know, and less conformism, really, and less consumerism. So yeah, then you have some clue why we have to fight so hard. Because I agree with you, Malta. It's fantastic to have.
And then, I mean, if you say, you can say it means less consumerism, but it depends on the model. Like the Maltese model is kind of encouraging kind of social sharing model, not for profit, kind of growing your own. That's, you know, I think it's more about sharing, is more about kind of like a communitarian approach, a social equity approach, maybe about justice of the victims of prohibition and the criminal justice system. But I think, you know, it can also mean you know, a step towards consumerism if it becomes all about marketing and edibles and like targeting young people and, you know, creating 1,001 different types of products.
That's a real delicate balance, but yeah, that goes, of course, for a lot of products that have some risks. And to me, to be too dogmatic in any kind of way would be wrong. So I would say, depending on the country, of course, and I have visited Malta, albeit a very long time ago. In a smaller society, maybe you can manage with just the social clubs, but in big cities in Europe like Barcelona and Prague and Amsterdam, there's no way you can have it all. You can work it out with just non-commercial clubs. So then you're going to need some extra. And if I look at my own country, that's one thing we've been campaigning for here, because it's also might be a surprise to hear. coffee shops are allowed, but cannabis social clubs are not. And we have tried it and explained all about the non-commercial aspect. So we've been campaigning that the majority of Dutch towns and cities have zero coffee shops. Like only in about a quarter of all the cities, we do have one or more coffee shops. So for the other ones that are usually a bit smaller or in, like very Christian areas, then the cannabis social club would be just perfect because it's more discreet. You can even, opt for 21 years of age if you want to. So to have like a different kinds of ways of selling cannabis, depending on the city and on all kinds of situations that you can have, I think would be a smart thing. And then to have the home grow, that's what I'm really jealous about if I look at Malta, because really, if you look at it, the home growing is the basis of everything, but it's also like a security measure, like almost a safety valve. Whether it's medical cannabis that is sold or commercial cannabis or social club cannabis, if they make it too bad, if the price is too high or the quality is too bad, you can always resort to your own home grow, and these companies will know this. So they have to, give a good product for a good price. Otherwise, people will start growing their own or growing their own more. So to me, that's fair. You should really start with the home growing and then continue from there. Which I think Malta, it's fantastic that you have it
Yeah,
right.
which is why I said there's a pretty solid foundation. You know what I mean? We see that the consumers aren't going to be left out, as in they can grow their own. They can actually form their own association with maybe just with friends. It doesn't have to be so many people. And there are things that we have put together, which will be presenting to the authority as well. Different systems of actual associations, which is very interesting. So yes, having that solid foundation is great for the future, especially. We'd like to keep it like this as long as possible. But, big business and commercialization is just kind of a part of life nowadays. And it's going to find its way in one way or another, because we're talking powerful people with a lot of money that will have friends in politics, which will change laws to benefit them. And I
Yep.
can see that coming.
Lobbyists,
Yeah, I can
lobbyists.
see that coming, unfortunately.
Now we like to use this term inclusive regulation. So you include home growing, you include craft growing, so you have like licenses for that are not too expensive, etc. And then we really believe the cake is huge. This cannabis thing, it can grow, grow, grow for all the people, medical, therapeutical. Like you say, if you have hyper marketing, it's not good for anything. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
for fruit and vegetables, but it does also bring like product innovation and variation. If I can buy like 60 different kinds of yogurt, why should I only be able to buy 5 kinds of wheat? I want at least 60 kinds. So
Yes, totally. And I agree with that, and that's where we're going to end up. Probably with a lot of different substances, and different ways of obtaining them. And I think that's great. But like I said, yeah, it's important that the consumer isn't sort of not allowed to grow their own, but has to buy it from somewhere. Or there's so many different things which could have happened if we did not intervene as an NGO when the laws were being written. So we had to make sure that the consumer was always protected. It's not going to be criminalized. Unfortunately, we still will be able to be criminalized in one way or another, and it will happen, and they will make headlines. But yeah, that's another thing. Sort of the press as well is something that is a bit annoying, because it seems that most news portals like to have some sort of relationship with the police, because they want to get the breaking news if there's been an accident to someone, or the murder or something. They'd like to, so they try and keep this relationship, but the police keep giving them these press releases to publish, which they obviously oblige to keep that relationship going. And this has been happening for decades.
Where
And
is the
these,
objectivity of journalism then?
no, I know, but you can tell because every single newspaper has the same article, exactly word by word, and they're talking about some poor sod who got picked up at a rave with a couple of
I mean,
pills.
but is it like there is a long-standing relationship between the press and the police, and that kind of prohibitionist or crime news narratives have
Yeah,
been
yeah,
like long-standing. They've been sort of part and parcel of news consumption for a long time. So obviously, I think it will take time to change that, to disrupt that.
But
Yeah.
it's really strange that they have a really strange behavior when it comes to drugs. You know, if you compare it to any other kind of crime that they would write about, or when the police does something wrong and they would write about. A good friend of mine once wrote this article, "The Street Value of a Journalist." And it's a brilliant piece where he's attacking them for also why do you write down these numbers that the police gives you for the so-called street value, where, for instance, if you talk about ecstasy, for instance, if they have a few barrels of this stuff that you use to make these pills, then they say, what does one pill, if a dealer will sell it in a nightclub in Australia, what will it fetch? And then, count back from there. And then you have it like this tiny producer, but they say, yeah, we found 70 million worth of drugs in his shed, and they don't question this. They write it down.
They just love it. It's like, in The Wire when they have drugs on the table, it's like the scenes where they have drugs on the table and they're like, look at what we have achieved. We're so good. And they call a press conference.
Yeah, I mean,
they're like,
I think programs like The Wire, make a big difference, especially in the States where, they're sort of driven by, TV and believe it like religion and stuff. So it's good to have these type of programs. I'd like to see more in Europe, and
Yep.
and of these things just questioning the whole drug war. It needs to be done.
Yeah, I think there's a few things going on in the UK. There was like a Vice series on the war on drugs, which was really good. And there's bits and bobs, but they're not mainstream. They're not like, they're still
Yeah.
quite niche, and they still remain, I guess, within an echo chamber to some extent. I wanted to ask you actually about whether you have any thoughts about cannabis reform in any way influencing kind of social perceptions of people who use drugs in any way. So I don't know if in the Netherlands, for example, if the kind of broader perceptions are still very much split between a more liberal and a more conservative kind of view, particularly in relation to cannabis consumption, and I guess more generally about recreational drug use. And then maybe, so I'll go to maybe Derek first, and then I'll come to you, Andrew.
Well, what's in a way maybe a bit confusing is that what really changed in '76 with the big law change is that they made like this the difference between what they called soft and hard drugs, and all soft drugs was basically only cannabis, and all hard drugs was all the rest, like chemical, the whole bit. So now after that, like ecstasy became popular, and really, if you know what you are using, frequently told us, the risk of getting on a horse and riding it is bigger than having a normal ecstasy dose. So there, the distinction between the hard and the soft drugs is sort of, where do you put it? So I would say for cannabis, it's normalized to a great extent, but not totally. And I would say that the public opinion is good towards legalization.
Oh, sorry, we missed you there.
Christian people, they sort of are still opposed to it and think it's immoral to use drugs. But I think for most people, like generations have now grown up seeing the coffee shops and knowing that the amount of cannabis that is used in the Netherlands, we are like really moderate. We are in the middle of the European countries. And that's one thing I started quite negative with what's wrong about it, but I must say that the coffee shops, even if you take into account Canada and the US and Uruguay as well, we are still the only place in the world where you can go in there without being a member or anything if you're an adult, not only buy the cannabis but also smoke it on the premise. Now you can no longer do it with tobacco. You have to do it pure. If you use tobacco, then it's prohibited in the coffee shop. But as long as you vape or smoke the pure cannabis, you can still do it there. And
Because
in
they
that,
know tobacco is the real evil.
hey, talk about how perceptions change, and now we do go forward. Only it's usually like 2 steps backward and 1.5 forward, or something like that. But to me, this still fills me with pride, and I still very much believe in the concept of the coffee shop. which is, with the risk of going on a tangent here, but I try to keep it short. With Corona, all the coffee shops were forced to be like only buy, takeout. So that whole aspect of being together and smoking weed together and also learning, etc., it has been gone for 2 years. And a lot of coffee shop owners, especially in Amsterdam, they are thinking, I make even more money. Why even bother having a consumption space there? And that really breaks my heart, because it's one of the best parts of the whole coffee shop idea.
It's like the pub, people go and
Yeah,
socialize and sit together, and there's a social aspect to it.
totally.
And mm, and
Yeah, I
also,
think unfortunately that's been left out in the new reform here too, and then I find it super important that to have on-site consumption for, I mean, many different reasons. Obviously, if you can avoid consuming at home on your own, obviously it's you need to have some sort of valid option. But so the cannabis in Malta has been very taboo, So a lot of people don't know the difference between cannabis, which they call hashisha, and heroin. For them it's the same. And the narrative coming out of the press, the media, sometimes even government agencies, or the Christian rehabilitation services, and them mainly, they've made it and kept it very taboo. And unfortunately, that gives more power to law enforcement and the courts, to easily hand down ridiculous sentences.
Yep.
So it's been very underground here. We do have growers, we do have people that make their waxes and shatters, and it's all there, but it's just very, very underground because of what can happen to you. But now obviously things are, Facebook pages are opening, and people are showing what they can do and helping and teaching each other. I think it's a beautiful thing. First time growers are asking for the sort of the legacy growers, I guess we can call them, for help, and they're loving the fact that they can actually give help and speak in the open about it. So I think what's happening now is a really beautiful thing.
You should really have, like in Canada, that 4 Plants Cup, that anybody can try and enter, and have a nice competition and give out a big prize to whoever.
Totally. But Canada's
best.
legalized, and we're not over here. You'd probably get arrested because you're not even allowed to share.
Okay, yeah. Then it's a bit complicated.
Yeah,
I guess
unfortunately.
you can see how, in a kind of more liberal country, there is a more commercial, there is a slight, direction towards more commercial models or more commercial kind of initiatives. And obviously there's like advantages and disadvantages of that, compared to like a more social and kind of sharing, not for profit sort of model. And I guess I'm interested in this idea that everything will slowly come, away from the underground, from the kind of like dark and underground scene and into the light. And I think that that could be great in terms of changing public perceptions, because effectively, if something is hidden, then that's the public perceptions are never going to change, because people just don't they don't know what they don't understand, what they're like ignorant about. And often their ignorance is not their own fault, it's just a lack of experience and the fact that the media and doesn't inform them properly about things. So yeah, I guess my next question would be related to media hype. uh, I would say that we part of the issue, and I think Andrew, you mentioned this before, is the kind of draconian punishments that are handed down to people, for even for possession and of course cultivation too. So I'm wondering what you both think is the role of cannabis users, but also activists and advocates to promote a kind of a kind of to put justice really at the center of reforms. So what does that mean in practice? Because obviously criminalization it's not just about the rights of users, but it's also about preventing the negative outcomes of criminalization.
I think activism is imperative. People need to stand up. They need to speak out always. But when it comes to cannabis, it's it's hard to speak out because of the amount of stigma there is around it. So even if something bad or some article had to come out, you know, saying some guy got busted for having a plant at home, a lot of people would be afraid to comment. This was I'm talking some years ago. They would be afraid to comment because, you know, of the name, and they don't want the boss to know, and they don't want. I mean, and this is just to comment, to talk about it, you know. So it was a very hushed up subject. We tried to get it into talk shows. We tried to speak to journalists. You know, there were a few that complied, but then it always sort of fizzled away. So it's not easy to keep it on the agenda, which is why then we sort of changed tact as an NGO. Our NGO changed tact, and we just went, we need to verticalize here. You know, we need to go straight for the jugular. We've got to find the person who's actually got the power, whoever the minister is, the prime minister. You know, we're just going to go and we're going to make sure we end up getting a meeting, which we obviously at the end did. We had a very, very open discussion. The prime minister at the time, I mean, the prime minister my age at the time, he was 39 when he was elected. So he totally got it, you know, and understood that a reform had to be made. But obviously it took time because he as well knew what the opposition was, how strong they are. Like I touched upon before, how these organizations have various outlets to get their message out. They even sent emails to every single parent of any church school student, you know, asking them to sign petitions. And I mean, they did everything they could. I mean, I went to Parliament myself when they tried to have the bill amended. There was a conglomerate of people, mainly from the Christian groups, Catholic school head principal, and we went to Parliament, and he had these 8 points that he wanted discussed. You know, he said these are very important, you know, and it's got to save our children. And we went through the points, and I mean, one of them was that they wanted the associations to be 1 kilometer away from every school or place where youths congregate. When in a country of 27 kilometers long, you know, it's not going to give you much opportunity.
So, like in an industrial estate, that's usually where they tend to like put kind of like contentious activities.
Yes, which actually defeats the whole purpose of having a place to buy cannabis, because then you're just letting the black market dealers hang around the centers, you know. But there were some points that were just, you know, so ridiculous that, I mean, the minister himself was going through them and he just denied every one of them. And I was lucky to be able to intervene and say my bit on some of these points, which was quite a proud moment to be there in Parliament. So yes, it's been, you know, it's been success for our NGO. I wish there were more NGOs that could have represented the voice of the people as well. But maybe hopefully the people had faith in us that we were doing a good job, so we just got on with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, as you're, you know, I think cannabis is like, I guess, the first step in terms of advocacy in the Maltese context. And I think that, you know, because it's such a small country, I think people are also afraid to like out themselves as drug users, right? And, you know, the potential repercussions that might have, you know, in their communities and stuff. So I think is a challenge, and it's difficult for people to do advocacy work in the context of a country that it's small and it's also quite conservative in terms of values and so on.
Yes, definitely. I mean, and it is a bit of a risk, you know, because you do get labeled, but I have absolutely personally no problem with being labeled. Someone who's in favor of cannabis.
Well, somebody's gonna go first, right? Somebody's gonna go first, and then hopefully things will improve and follow afterwards. Derrick, do you have any thoughts about, you know, what is the, you know, whether justice should be at the center of drug policy reform, cannabis policy reform, and what that looks like in practice?
Well, to me, what's very interesting, it touches on so many things, you know. It's really about the way you want to look at the government, at the society, what a government is for, the right to self-determination, the right to choose your own medicine, the right to really the freedom to farm as anchored, which I would also like to tell everybody about that's listening. Go to the NCOT website. It's a European organization for drug reform. I learned so much there, you know, and I was president also there for a while, way back. Yeah, so it really depends on what is your situation if you are in a country or in a sort of place, what you can do and what you should put your energy into. Like for a while we put a lot of energy and also money into this event called Cannabis Liberation Day in Amsterdam, and it turned out that it really worked to rally people and to connect the industry with the activists and the patients with the activists, with the industry, with the coffee shop owners, and getting more sort of traction on that, because in the Netherlands, and it might be the same in more places, it's very fragmented. The people are really in their small circle, and if they do the medicine bit, they don't do the hemp bit, and if they are into hemp, they don't want to talk to the coffee shop people, whatever. So this is one of the things that we, yeah, in Dutch, Verbond is really union, getting together people and groups, and not really, we like to empower them, is what I like to say. We make like websites, we put out brochures. One of the things we do is the website called Veilig Thuiskweken, so safe home growing, which is for both indoor and outdoor, giving just the basic tips and not be commercial. There's not a single commercial banner on there. It's really NGO objective information that we give to people so that they can grow more safely. And similar to that, we have this website about cannabis and driving, you know, explaining to people what the rules are, what this saliva test means, that we try to lobby for this as well, because this will come in Malta as well. It comes everywhere with cannabis. It's a really big problem that you cannot at this moment say or have any means to say for sure if somebody cannot drive because he's too stoned to do so. So there are a lot of different subjects and where you could focus on. And then what has always been my experience, it depends on the group of people that you can get together, because if somebody is already interested in some aspect, it's good to have them specialize and put that on the table and try to move forward.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're advocating is really also an approach where you really empower users, you empower people to be able to kind of make their own decisions, to learn more, to accrue more knowledge, and to, you know, better understand, I guess, their conditions, but also their choices in terms of what they want to do, whether they want to grow or whether they want to use for medical or whatever. So
Yep.
that's fantastic. That's great to hear. Yeah. Right, right. I think we're going to wrap up because I feel like I've sort of squeezed your brains too much already. But I'm so pleased that you could join us today, and it's been a really interesting conversation. I certainly feel like I've learned a lot from you, and that I'm having a lot of thoughts and ideas running through my head right now. So thank you so much for joining me.
Can I put in a
Thank you,
little
Julia.
plug?
Yes, yes, Derek. Please
Because
do.
for like over 2 years, I've been doing presenting my own podcast together with my good friend Rens. And on the
Yes.
website, if we have the English episodes, you can go to the English episodes. So most of them are in Dutch, but I think about 10 now are in English. So if you go to the website IT Podcast and pod spelled with a T .nl, then you can find them with the episodes, and it's all about cannabis with a lot of interesting guests. It's a lot of fun.
Amazing. Thanks, Derek. I will put the link up on our website as well when I share the
Great.
podcast so
Thanks a lot.
that I can direct people to it as well. Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you for having me, and I hope to catch up soon. See
Yes.
you, Derek.
Thank you
Bye
so
bye.
much. Take care. Bye bye.
All
Bye
the best.
Bye.
bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.